A recent report for the United Way shows some troubling trends, that inequality is increasing in the provincial capital and in Peel and York regions. Furthermore, the arrows are pointing the wrong way, particularly for young people, people of color, and immigrants, regardless of when they arrived. Here to help us unpack some of those findings and what's behind them, we welcome Micheline Laflèche, Vice President of Strategy, Research and Policy at United Way, Greater Toronto. Gurpreet Malhotra, CEO at Indus Community Services. Finn Poshman, economist and Fraser Institute resident scholar. Kofi Hope, Senior Policy Advisor at the Wellesley Institute. And Jay Pitter, placemaker, co-editor of Subdivided, City Building in an Age of Hyperdiversity, and author of the forthcoming book, Where We Live. And it's good to welcome you all back to TVO here. Pleasure to see you. I guess, first time for you here, but you've known each other for a little while. Yeah. Micheline, I want to start with you. Obviously, this is your report. It calls the GTA the income inequality capital of Canada. What is that finding based on?
It's based on looking at individual incomes of the whole population of the Toronto region and determining that against other regions in Canada. So we actually titled Greater Toronto the Income Inequality Capital of Canada back in 2015 using 2005 census data. So already at that point we had reached this level. This new research looks at the 2015 census data as well, looks at the experiences of individuals from different groups, and reconfirms not only are we still the income inequality capital of Canada, things have got worse. Well,
you say reconfirms, and I'm interested that you put it that way, because we have had, for example, David Hulchansky on this program, who, I mean, I think it's almost a decade ago that he came out with this Three Torontos report, that we were becoming increasingly three communities in isolation of one another. So is there anything particularly new about what you have to say in this report?
Yes, so the research that David did talks about the geographic, how people show up in geography in Toronto. So where people with high income live, where people with low income live, and where people with middle income, who are declining in numbers as well as proportions, live. Our research is also based on that, and a lot of our work has been done with David. But this new report looks specifically at individuals. We look at it from the perspective of age, immigration status, and whether or not you're from a racialized group or not. And we try to, for the first time, using microdata from the census, which means it's very detailed data, so we have a really good picture as a result. It tells us where people sit in terms of income inequality within groups and across the population in total.
Well, let's share some of the statistics here from this report. And Sheldon, I'll ask you to bring the graphic up right now, if you would, and I'm going to read this out loud so that people listening on podcast can hear it as well. For every dollar that a Canadian-born person in permanent full-time work earns, an immigrant in Canada for 10 years or more in the same form of work earns only 67 cents. For every dollar earned by a mid-aged person, someone say between the ages of 35 to 64, for every dollar they earn, a young person between the ages of 25 to 34 earns 63 cents. For every dollar a white person earns, a racialized person in Toronto earns 52 cents. Okay, we got to get into that. When you hear those kinds of numbers, what do you think?
A couple of things hit me. One is that what I've been feeling personally is that I've been telling my children for years that it was hard for us when we were starting out, and that for them, it looked daunting, and mortgages seem so high, and all these other things seem out of reach. But in fact, it is much harder for them than it was for me as we were starting out.
And you thought presumably it would get better for them?
Yes,
being the second generation.
That's the, if you will, the tacit promise of Canada, is that it's supposed to get better. The longer you stay, the more settled you become, the harder you work. And what this research is handily done is proven that that is not the case.
Jay, what's your view when you see those numbers?
I think these numbers are particularly disheartening, especially in a city where we pride ourselves on our openness in terms of welcoming newcomers. We pride ourselves on being global leaders when it comes to diversity. And we also talk a lot about the future city, yet we're not investing in young people. So for me, the divide is not simply about the numbers, it's about our perception and how we're actually performing.
Kofi, what do the numbers say to you?
Well, they say to me that we're in a situation where it's not that the pie has been shrinking for most of the time over the last 30 years, and particularly the last 10, 15 years. The pie has been getting bigger. The issue is how it's divided, and that more and more folks who've been winning in the economy historically, we've created an economy where they're winning even more, and those who've been left out and haven't had opportunities, the barriers are only getting more compounded. And so that concerns me, because if this is what's happening in boom times, a time where we see cranes all over the place and development, what happens when we hit a recession if these are the inequalities that we've already entrenched?
Finn, you're the economist here. When you look at these numbers, as an economist, how do you react?
Well, the United Way report has some good data and points up some very troubling issues and some long-term issues for Canada. I would have started, though, with more of a good news story, because over the past couple of decades, the poverty rate or the low-income rate within Canada has been steadily falling. The inequality has not risen in any meaningful way in the past few decades, so this is a pretty good baseline. It's not quite the same within Toronto, and that's correct. There is a little more higher level of income disparity that we've picked up. But to the extent that we're talking about the immigrant community, we really have to subdivide and break out different people by types of immigrants, what their background is. For instance, among the economic class of immigrants, so this is skilled workers, trades, business class immigrants, that subset of immigrants, which is probably about half, they're more likely to be working than resident Canadians. Their incomes on average are higher than the Canadian-born. So these are some good things. What we really need to know more about is why, in Toronto in particular, we're seeing more difficulty among younger immigrants.
What do you think of that analysis?
I think that it is predictable as Canadians and also as Torontonians. We're very married to a good news story. And I think that we have to become more courageous and have uncomfortable conversations. And I think we really lack the capacity to do that. So I think, we love our city and we love our country. Let's move past that and get into the messy stuff.
But if he's got empirically provable facts on his side, which if I know Finn, he does, what's wrong with what he said?
So here's the thing with empirical facts and statistics. You can use stats to tell whatever story you want to tell. So absolutely what you said was accurate, and I'm not contesting that. What I am contesting is this idea that we avoid uncomfortable data because we don't want to look at entrenched systemic issues that make us fundamentally uncomfortable and that go against the way that we perceive ourselves as good, well-intended, polite Canadians.
Finn, you want to come back on that?
Well, I think I mostly agree. I'm not quite sure where it leads, however. But some of the uncomfortable facts have to do with the changing composition of immigrants. I mentioned the performance, the labor market performance of business class, economic class immigrants. You cannot say the same about family class immigrants. You cannot say the same about refugees or the other categories other than the economic migrant categories. In the past couple of decades, and this is, a lot of us in the think tank world have been very concerned about immigrant performance for exactly the reasons that we're talking about. We know that the changing composition, in other words, where immigrants are coming from. So in the past generation or two, there's been a big shift. So we have more immigrants now coming from Southeast Asia than we used to do, more immigrants from South and Central America, from the Caribbean than we used to do. That has an impact on things like education and labor market outcomes. For instance, if you're a Southeast Asian immigrant, you are less likely than otherwise to finish a high school diploma in Canada. If you're a South or Central American or from a Caribbean country, you're less likely than other immigrants to complete university degrees. And these are going to have an impact on wages and labor market performance.
Micheline, let me get you to comment on the notion that perhaps the report didn't take the distinctions that Finn has advanced here adequately into account when it came to its conclusions.
Well, obviously, I think I would have to disagree with that. Clearly, the data set that we used were all employed people who were earning income. We ruled out the people who had zero income. So we were looking at as much as possible with that kind of data set and trying to do long-term trends, which limits what data you can use like for like. And I think the important thing to get back to here is that it's not about the type of immigrant or the background that immigrants come from. The reality is that immigrants still come here with high levels of education, as high or higher than Canadian-born populations in the working group population. What's important to understand about the data is that looking at as much as like for like as we can, in 1980, the differential in earnings between immigrant groups, between racialized and white and Canadian-born groups, between racialized groups and non-racialized groups, and between young earners and middle-aged earners was smaller than it is today. Smaller substantially. Like when you look at the charts associated with our report, you can just see how big the change has been, and it is quite shocking when you look at it.
So you are very comfortable concluding that the capital city of Ontario is a much less just place today than it was 1 or 2 generations ago?
Inequality has grown.
Gurpreet, I want to ask you, we have this slogan in Toronto, right? Diversity is our strength. It is the motto of the city. But the report also says the racial divide in the GTA has reached a historic high. Where do you think the capital city falls short when it comes to the promise made towards diversity?
Barriers to employment, barriers to accessing promotion and other strengthening of family support. Building on what Jay had said earlier around uncomfortable conversations, the idea that newcomers face a particular set of barriers is one, but this report also pointed out that racialized groups did less well. So Canadian-born people of color face barriers to accessing particular jobs or moving up within those careers as time goes by. So all of this ties into the fact that, yes, diversity may be our strength, but it is not something that is being fed, it is not something that is being easily supported, and it is something that is beginning to hurt, and that is not a useful or good thing for city building going forward.
Well, Kofi, let me use Jay's words about having an uncomfortable conversation here. Should we just call this what it is? Is this systemic racism?
I think that's a big part of it. I think there's 2 pieces. There's systemic racism that's clearly there, and
So just being clear, this is white people being unwilling to share the pie with people who don't look like them. Is that what we're saying?
I think that might be too crude, because I think racism takes different forms. There is the overt racism of just kind of refusing someone an opportunity because you have a bias against who they are. But a lot of what happens in bias is at a subconscious level. It's in those 30 seconds in a job interview you say, I don't know if Omar is going to fit with the culture here. I just have a feeling, or I'm not so sure if so-and-so, will work with what we've got going on in this workplace. And that's another form of racism that's actually more prevalent. In those microseconds where we make decisions, we don't consciously think about it, but we have an inclination. Oh, that person's sitting beside me on the subway. I feel uncomfortable. I'll pull my purse close. That's not usually overt racism, but it could still be influenced by a system that says certain groups are problematic, certain groups we should worry about, or certain groups are less part of the Canadian mosaic than others.
And Jay, how much of that accounts for the inequality that we are reading about in this report?
Well, I would love to go back to this diversity is our strength stuff. We need to cut that out as well. So it is proven and shown that over the past 60 years, while we've been advancing diversity initiatives and policy, social inequities have actually increased at the same time. And here's the reason why. Diversity in its most popular manifestation addresses representation and celebration. And so what I mean by that is, as a city, we love to put on ethno-racial garb, go to a potluck, everyone enjoys a wonderful samosa, so we do that kind of thing. I can pick up an organizational brochure and see myself reflected. These are not bad things. But to be clear, diversity has limitations. Diversity is not rigorous, nor is it courageous enough to address issues like displacement of entire groups of people, including Indigenous peoples. It is not rigorous or courageous enough to address the gender pay gap. It is not rigorous or courageous enough to address lack of accessibility within the workplace. And so again, going back to uncomfortable conversation, until we as Canadians develop the courage to talk about these things head on, rather than organizing a potluck or a street festival, we're going to be having this conversation over and over again.
Let me introduce the notion of housing here. Micheline, I'll get you to comment on this first. Let me just throw a few numbers on the table here. An Ipsos poll from last October suggested 85% of Greater Toronto Area residents of all ages said they were concerned about a young person's ability to buy a home. 94% of millennials said that. I'm not sure why that number isn't at 100%, but anyway, 94% is a big number. StatsCan says 76% of people aged 15 to 34 in Toronto are either immigrants or have one parent who is an immigrant. If young people, if racialized minorities cannot afford to live here anymore, who's the city for?
I mean, that's the question. We want to build a great city, but it has to be great for everybody. And that has to be our fundamental objective in everything that we do as city builders in terms of urban governance. That's where we need to bring this. I want to pick up what Jay was saying and bring that back. The first kind of recommendation that we make in this report is indeed to name this problem. It's an unignorable issue. The facts are the facts, and it's not just our report that talks about how inequality has grown and what that looks like and who is suffering the negative consequences most of this. Who's bearing the burden? We know who it is. We can see who it is in the data. We've seen it 100 times before. The time now, it is now the time to have that conversation about who we are and who we want to be as a society.
People may agree on the data, they may not agree on how to get where you want to go.
They may not agree on how to get where we go, but we need people to agree that the problem is the problem in order to figure out how we're going to get to where we need to go. And I think the conversation is the first piece. We're not going to solve the housing crisis through a conversation, of course, but we are going to begin to identify the right policy levers, the right practice levers that employers can take, that individuals can take, that we can pull apart our institutions and understand what's going wrong that's creating systemic discrimination, creating barriers for certain groups and specific groups to be able to succeed and get ahead, to fix the opportunity equation, as we say in the report.
Finn, is there broad agreement, in your view, on the problem that has been analyzed in this report?
I think we do have broad agreement that many of Canada's immigrants in the last few decades have not done as well as prior waves of immigrants. I think that's fairly well established, and what to do about it is a slightly different set of issues. We talk about inclusion, which is all very good, but what I would have liked to see more of in this report is ways to ensure that young immigrants do a better job of finishing high school, and they have a high quality of high school education, steering them into any sort of subsequent training, whether it's a skilled trade or whether a university or somewhere else. The more that we do that, beginning with a good high quality high school education, the more we know that people are going to fare.
Okay, everybody wants in on this. I can see this. Let's
in later years.
Gurpreet, Jay, Kofi,
Okay,
go.
Again, you're focusing on a small group of individuals, and yes, more educational opportunities would definitely be welcome. No one would ever deny that. But a root here is the racism inherent within the systems we have. When it comes to hiring, when it comes to promotions, when it comes to whose resume actually gets past the pile and into the who will call for interviews, that process right there. In fact, I'd even challenge anyone who looks around their company, their organization, and notices that there isn't a lot of diversity, that what they could probably do is start by blanking out the names of who it is that's applying on a resume and keeping, of course, a file separate so that they can contact them, and then blanking out where they got their credential from, provided it equates comfortably with the Canadian requirement. And then see what happens, because if it were to meet that challenge, I'm very confident that you would end up with more people in the interview stage and then more people actually moving into jobs that offer more prosperity. So that's, if you will, a challenge that would get to the issue around racism and systemic barriers there.
Why would it be so controversial, Jay, to suggest that it's a good thing for the people we're talking about here to finish high school, go get a post-secondary degree, and improve themselves?
Not controversial at all.
Okay, because y'all made a face when he said that.
Oh no, we absolutely did. Not a controversial idea at all. In fact, if I go back a couple of generations, that's exactly what my mom did. But I'm going to put on my city building hat right now and tell you this, that this is an underlying city building issue. So if we look at housing, and then I'll talk about public transit just a little bit. So let's take housing, for example. We know that an increasing number of people are directing more than 30% of their household incomes to rent. And so what that means is that there is less opportunity to pursue education and language classes than there were 50 years ago. So, 50 years ago, if you moved into the city, you could get a home or live somewhere for a reasonable rent, and you still had time to go to school and to upgrade. However, in this economy and this housing market, what's happening is that people are working 2 or 3 jobs to pay for shelter. And those high school students that you're talking about, because I grew up in social housing, and many of my friends after school, instead of studying or participating in extracurricular activities, they went and worked jobs. There are kids right now in Etobicoke, in Rexdale, in Scarborough who are going to factory jobs after school to help their mother keep the heat on in the winter. And so, theoretically, what you said makes perfect sense, but on the ground, within the context in these communities, with fewer pathways toward prosperity, this is the reality. So these young people simply do not have the time to get that high school diploma. They are helping to pay for the light, to keep the lights on.
Let's hear from Kofi on this.
Yeah, and I think the reason I might have had a bit of a face was not the analysis, and I think it's great that we've brought attention to the education system, but it's the implication that could be there, and not inside of your head, but the implication that there are issues with certain communities, and that is the reason we see people failing to integrate or failing to graduate. And I think it's much more complex than that. When we look at the school system, let's look at the reality of public school system in Toronto. There is huge inequities between schools. If you go to a school in Northwest, in Rexdale or Jane and Finch, if you go to a school then in North Toronto, in a Rosedale or Forest Hill, and I've done this, I've gone to these different, the difference in the building, in the quality of the teaching, in who's there is immense. And we have a system with school choice where parents who have children who may be from families that are of more means, tend to pull their kids out of schools if they see that they're not doing well, or there's a lot of low-income kids there, and kind of cluster them either in specialty schools or schools that look more alike. So we have a reality that some schools are 80-90% racialized, people of color in the city, and flip side, schools are vastly white in other areas. And there's a huge achievement difference. So when we talk about, well, why aren't kids graduating, we have to look at the schools, look at the school system, look at the incentives. Are we sending our best and brightest and most culturally adept teachers to schools that really need them? Or are these the schools that are falling to the wayside, that even physically are not in the same conditions as other ones? Schools that have parents that can raise, tens of thousands of dollars through corporate connections to add like a new gym or a new activity, and then schools where parents are struggling to make PTA meetings, not because they don't care, but because they're working 2 or 3 jobs. They're not able to be.
100%. Say it all twice over. This is where we really need to, you hold the school board's feet to the fire. You hold the provincial government, to the Department of Education, hold their feet to the fire. You insist, we should insist, on effective school performance for all of our children, right through to the end of high school. In other words, no matter where you're from, no matter what your parents' educational background is, no matter what your income supports are around your community, we should be insisting on a high level of performance in languages, science, and in math for all of our kids in public school and in high school. And when we do that, and when we do it very well, we're going to worry about our youth much less than otherwise.
Micheline.
Yeah, and I think we should be, and we should expect that. But we also know in reality that's not what happens, that there are lots of social processes that interfere with that desire for us to have an equal society and equal access. This the whole report is about. It's called the opportunity equation. If you put the effort in and you have access to opportunity, that's the key part here, then you should succeed.
That
the
requires
problem is,
a network of people
that
outside
requires
your
a network
community.
of people, that requires access to good education in every neighborhood, which we do not have. We can insist on it, but we still do not have it. We have to work harder at naming those problems. This is not, this data is not being dragged down by a group, by the young people in the sample. The young people in the sample are all working people in this particular sample. So this is not the real issue that's behind us. This is about bigger systemic issues that involve education, that involve the labor market. These young people today, my stepchildren, your children, are all going into a different labor market than I was entering and than my mother and father entered. They go into jobs where they're starting at a lower wage, or salary even. They're not going to be able to advance because they don't have the same number of quality jobs, decent work with benefits, long-term security that enable them to then make the big life decisions that they need to make around housing, around further education, around having children. What we desperately need for our labor market as well for the future.
It's more precarious, isn't it?
It's more precarious. So we have a long-term structural challenge with the way the labor market is beginning to shape itself and the impact that has on young people. And that racialized and immigrant young people are a good proportion of our young people today is a major problem because of the system, the systemic issues, not because of them.
Jay.
So education has always been a pathway to possibility, but we also have to consider the fact that people can't even get the bus to work. So we're talking about this aspirational journey to possibility. And again, using a city building lens, what we know is that lower income communities have less access to good and reliable public transit. And as a city, we are absolute jokers. We can't even figure out how to build a couple of LRT stops. So, we're talking about a pathway to higher education. People can't even get to work at 9 o'clock.
So that's interesting. You're not just making an education argument, an access to jobs argument, a housing argument. Transit is part of this equation as well in a big way.
Absolutely. People can't even get from point A to point B. Transit has become such a partisan, polarized issue in the city, and it is hurting everyone, especially the people referenced in this report.
Gurpreet.
And I have to emphasize that the report is about the GTA. So you're looking at also Peel and York regions and the areas around Toronto, where those issues are even more pronounced. Housing, the lack of accessible and affordable housing, much weaker transit systems than there exist in Toronto, and those form other barriers. Education systems at local board levels that have not kept up with the diversity of their student populations, and that further compounds it if a young person has challenges at school, that they will not receive the supports through, for example, the Peel Board of Education, because the staffing complement that's there does not look anything like the cultural language base of that young person. But again, moving beyond the education piece, it is once in a job, do they get considered for promotion? Do they get an opportunity to move up the ladder? And what this research has shown is that no, they don't.
Kofi.
Yeah, and I think so much of that has to do with this idea of social capital, your social network, fitting in. And that's where it's not just even race or ethnicity, class makes a difference, right? If you're in a corporate office and you can talk about going to Muskoka and, having gone to the Leafs game and that sort of thing, that's part of the cultural milieu of that office you're in, you're able to make those connections. You're able to say, oh, you know what, he's a really nice guy. Like, we should open up opportunity, or let's have drinks after work, and let's do coaching. And when you have folks who maybe come from different cultural backgrounds or different class backgrounds, they may not share the same language. It may not be as easy to integrate into the culture, and people continue to get passed over. And so what do? Well, we can't change people's backgrounds, but we can be as intentional in how we operate our spaces to be inclusive by design, whether that's about mentorship programs, whether that's about creating different streams, whether that's about using hiring processes like blind hiring, where we don't see someone's address. Like, I worked for many years in the Jane Finch community. Young people there, when they applied for jobs, would have to change their address to an aunt in Vaughn's address just to get a call back. Because if they had Jane or they had Finch on it, they would simply get 0 calls because we've stigmatized certain communities. And so these are some of the changes where you go beyond diversity programming, as Jay said, to real inclusion. And that means changing the way we do business.
Absolutely. I'd like to go back to city building. So what you were talking about as well in terms of social capital and networks, this also harkens back to city building as well. So growing up in an inner city community, one of the reasons that I've been able to create a pathway forward is because early on, I lived close to a good subway system. My second grade teacher would pop me on the subway and I would navigate this entire city. So at a very early age, I developed something that I refer to as spatial entitlement. And so what that means is that even if I go into a workplace and I don't see myself, I absolutely feel like I belong here and I'm gonna rock this. So when you have a city though, where you have entire communities that don't have access to good transit, that are not seeing the rest of the city, that doesn't have good amenities, those young people right out the gate feel less than. So even if they had access to good education, if early on your imagination is this big rather than this big because you are not able to see things, because you are not able to develop relationships across difference, and because you are not able to develop a great sense of self-worth, all of the programming in the world and policies and services will not resolve that kind of internalized discrimination, and that kind of limited worldview.
I want to add one more voice to this conversation. This is a fellow named Matthew Lau, who's a writer with the Financial Post, who he tends to see things from the conservative side of the equation, and he had this to say in an op-ed that ran last week. The doom and gloom narrative about Toronto immigrants is more alarmist than it is alarming. The happy reality is that the Greater Toronto Area remains an attractive place for immigrants, and the picture painted by United Way of immigrants being relegated into society's basement relies on a mishandling of statistics. With nearly half of its population and growing comprised of immigrants, Toronto might well be one of the greatest immigration success stories there is. Okay, Micheline, push back.
So I'm not going to give a good long methodology argument. I will say that this work that we do with skilled team members at United Way, as well as skilled partners at the universities. We work with the University of Toronto on this research. We've worked with Statistic Canada on this research.
How about his view that the capital city is, in fact, one of the great immigration success stories ever? That's his main point.
I think the capital city is the great attractor of immigrants still, although our proportions of immigrants coming to Greater Toronto is decreasing and has been decreasing over some time now. But still, people come. They come for lots of reasons. They come because, of course, there is some opportunity here. We're not saying that there isn't any opportunity here, nor that some people fight against the odds and make it, just like some people who have lots of advantage don't make it. And there's lots of different reasons for that. People come here because their families, their friends, and their groups are here that give them the social capital they need to get a foothold. And people come here because it is still a great place to live overall. We're not arguing that either. But you cannot argue with the fact that the gap between income, between what people are able to earn and the associated economic and social security that they can gain from that, has changed dramatically. The gap is wider. People who were born here and people who are non-racialized, i.e. white groups, have, on average, excelled far beyond those who come from immigrant groups or from racialized groups. And that is a problem. It was a problem in 1980 when there was a differential. It is an even bigger problem now when that differential is massive.
I obviously wouldn't deny your empirically provable facts here, but there are white people in this community
Yes.
who don't feel it, and they like Donald Trump. And they like Doug Ford because they have given those people a voice when they think they are voiceless.
And that's very true. And like I said, these are averages, and that helps us understand bigger processes that are going on. What our recommendations are aimed at is helping people who are experiencing the exclusion and the barriers, and that will help everyone. By having good public policy that is founded on trying to make a great city great for everyone, it will actually make it great for everyone as well. When we have good pathways to employment, from education to employment, it's going to work for everyone as well. And I think, this does not have to be a divisive argument. What this should be is a unifying argument.
We are out of time, and if I can steal your line, Jay, you guys rock this. Thanks a lot. That was a great discussion, very timely and important discussion here on TVO tonight, so I'm grateful to all of you for coming in and sharing your views on this. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
The Agenda with Steve Paikin is brought to you by the Chartered Professional Accountants of Ontario, helping businesses stay on the right side of change with strategic thinking, insightful decisions, and business leadership. Are you on the right side of change? Ask an Ontario CPA.